New York City, in the autumn of 1941, was a city holding its breath. The skyscrapers stood as arrogant monuments to American industry, while across the ocean, the world descended into a darkness that seemed, for now, a distant nightmare. But in the heart of Manhattan, on West 52nd Street, the hallowed ground known as Swing Street, the music played on, a defiant, frantic celebration in the face of the gathering storm. And at the epicenter of this sonic universe stood the Scarlet Club. It was not a place one found by accident. Tucked behind an unmarked blood-red door, its existence was a whispered password among the city's power elite, the politicians with shady deals, the mobsters with clean suits, the artists with tortured souls. To pass its velvet rope was to enter a sanctuary where the rules of the outside world did not apply. The air was a permanent, intoxicating haze of cigar smoke, expensive perfume, and the sweat of pure, unadulterated genius. On its small, dimly lit stage, the very architecture of American music was being rewritten night after night. The first to vanish was Liliana "Lily" Dubois. She was 19 years old, a Creole beauty from New Orleans with a voice that seemed to carry the heat of the bayou and the sorrow of the Mississippi Delta. When she sang, the room stilled. Her signature piece, the one that brought a hush even to the most jaded, champagne-soaked crowd, was Strange Fruit. She didn't just perform it, she channeled it. Her rendition was a ghostly, heartbreaking incantation, a seance that made the lyrics of lynching and racial terror feel immediate and personal to the wealthy white patrons who heard it. On the night of October the 14th, she sang it as her final number. The applause was not loud, it was deep, a collective, shaken exhalation. She took a bow, her smile fragile. She was seen accepting a glass of champagne from an admirer at the shadowy end of the bar. And then she was gone. Her apartment in Harlem was empty. Her suitcase, her sheet music, her life, all left behind. Lily Dubois had become a ghost, her final note hanging in the air like a curse. The missing persons report landed on the desk of Detective Francis F. Corvin. A 20-year veteran of the NYPD, Corvin was a man built of solid, unflashy parts. He had a face like a clenched fist and a belief system rooted in the tangible: fingerprints, ballistics, and the cold, hard geometry of a crime scene. The Scarlet Club, with its aura of curated decadence and whispered power, made his skin crawl. The owner, Salvatore "Sal" Moretti, was a man of polished menace who offered smooth condolences and a wall of silence. The band leader, the legendary trumpet player Miles "the King" Johnson, was more sympathetic but just as unhelpful, his eyes holding a weary, cynical knowledge of the world's cruelties. "A girl like that," Moretti had said, with a dismissive wave of his hand, a diamond ring glinting in the low light. "This city, it eats them alive. She probably got a better offer. Hollywood, a rich husband, you know how it is." But Corvin didn't know. Lily's life didn't suggest a flight of fancy. It suggested a disciplined, ambitious climb. The champagne glass had been washed. The staff were clannish, loyal to Moretti and the club's reputation. There were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, no ransom note. It was as if the city had simply opened up and swallowed her whole. Corvin had only a detective's instinct, a cold, nagging feeling in his gut that told him this was not an ending, but a beginning. He felt the first faint tremor of a pattern with only one data point. He knew with a weary certainty that there would be more. A beautiful young singer vanishes from New York's most exclusive jazz club, leaving behind no trace but the echo of a haunting song. When a second performer disappears after singing the very same melody, a terrifying pattern emerges. Is a serial killer stalking the stages of Swing Street, hunting for a very specific sound?
The only clue is a song about death, and the detective on the case is a man who deals in facts, not music. To uncover the first physical evidence that links these disappearances, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a moment of this investigation.
Three weeks later, the second shoe dropped. The victim was Charlotte "Charlie" Green, a brassy, bold blonde from Chicago with a voice that could punch through brick and attitude to match. Her style was the antithesis of Lily's, all power, swagger, and sharp-edged glamour. But her final number, on the night she vanished, was the same: Strange Fruit. She had sung it not with Lily's ethereal sorrow, but with a raw, furious energy that was just as unsettling. She changed out of her sequined gown, told the other chorus girls she was headed for a late supper, and stepped out into the greasy darkness of the alley behind the club. She never made it to the diner. Two singers, two different worlds, two different styles, one song. Standing in that cold, garbage-strewn alley, Detective Frank Corvin felt the second piece of the puzzle slam into place with the force of a physical blow. This was not a coincidence. It was a pattern. A predator was hunting on Swing Street, and his bait was a melody. The press, kept at bay by Moretti's influence and police discretion, had yet to grasp the connection. But inside the precinct, the case was upgraded. A special task force was quietly assembled, and Corvin, despite his discomfort with the high-profile venue, was placed in charge. He was assigned a new partner, Detective Rita O'Donnell. She was young, sharp, and one of the few women detectives in the department. Where Corvin was a bulldog, relentless and straightforward, O'Donnell was a scalpel, precise, analytical, and intuitive. She saw connections in the spaces between the facts. Their first act was to tear apart the lives of Liliana Dubois and Charlotte Green, searching for a thread that connected them beyond the stage. They found nothing. Their backgrounds, their social circles, their dreams, all were worlds apart. The only common denominator was the Scarlet Club and their performance of Strange Fruit. O'Donnell, armed with a notepad and a fierce intellect, began to research the song itself. She learned it was a poem by a Jewish school teacher from the Bronx set to music and made infamous by Billie Holiday. It was a stark, unflinching protest against lynching, its lyrics depicting the strange fruit of black bodies hanging from southern trees. It was a dangerous song, a political song, a song that forced a conversation no one in a luxury club wanted to have. Why was it being featured at the Scarlet Club? And why was it drawing the attention of a predator? "It's not just the song," O'Donnell told Corvin, spreading her notes across his cluttered desk. "It's the reaction. It's the only time the club goes completely silent. No clinking glasses, no chatter. It's a moment of collective, uncomfortable truth. The killer isn't just interested in the singers. He's interested in that moment. He's stealing it." This insight reframed the entire investigation. They began re-interviewing everyone at the club, but now with a new focus. They weren't just asking about the women, they were asking about the audience during that song. They were looking for a face in the crowd, a regular, someone whose behavior was off. A picture began to emerge, hazy at first, then coming into sharper focus. A bartender recalled a man. He always sat alone at the same booth in the far back, shrouded in shadow. He never drank much. He never applauded. When Strange Fruit was performed, he didn't move. He simply sat, perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, his gaze fixed on the singer.
with an intensity that was more absorption than admiration. A waitress described him as nice-looking, quiet, well-dressed, sad eyes. He was a ghost, a man who paid in cash and left no impression other than a lingering sense of profound focus. He was their first viable lead, the man in the booth. But a description of well-dressed and sad was not enough to find a man in New York City. They needed to understand his obsession. O'Donnell, leveraging her university education, delved into the musicology of it all. She obtained the sheet music and compared the accounts of the performances. Lily sang it in B-flat minor. Charlie sang it in A minor. They were in different keys. So, Corvin grunted, rubbing his tired eyes. Exactly, O'Donnell insisted, her eyes alight. He's not obsessed with one version of the song. He's obsessed with different interpretations of it. He's a connoisseur. He's sampling them like vintages of wine. Each singer offers a new flavor of sorrow, a new shade of pain. That's what he's collecting. The theory was chilling. It painted a portrait of a killer of rare sophistication and twisted taste. He wasn't driven by base urges, but by a grotesque aesthetic hunger. He was an aficionado of anguish, and his palette was the human voice. The man in the booth was his agent, his scout, his silent critic. This new profile meant they could no longer wait for him to strike again. They had to draw him out. They needed to offer a new, irresistible vintage. They needed to plant a singer on the stage of the Scarlet Club and have her perform Strange Fruit in a new key, with a new texture of tragedy. They needed to set a trap with a woman's voice as the bait. The investigation reveals a killer with the mind of a connoisseur, collecting not women, but their unique interpretations of a single tragic song. The mysterious man in the booth is his scout, a phantom audience of one. With no name and no face, the police are powerless. Their only option is a dangerous gambit, to place an undercover officer on the stage and have her sing the song that is a siren's call to a monster. But can they control the performance? And can they protect the bait when the predator finally shows himself? The stage is set for a deadly performance. To meet the woman who will risk her life to become the next target, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The plan was audacious, dangerous, and fraught with 100 points of potential failure. It required a woman who could not only act the part of a rising jazz star, but could genuinely deliver a powerful, moving performance of one of the most challenging songs ever written. The NYPD's roster of undercover operatives did not include such a specialist. They had to look inward, to their own ranks. They found her in the records division. Officer Eleanor Shaw was a 5-year veteran who had traded a promising music scholarship for a badge and a gun. She came from a family of cops, and her passion for justice had ultimately outweighed her love for the stage. But the talent was still there, dormant, a live wire buried deep. When Corvin and O'Donnell approached her in a soundproofed interrogation room, laying out the grim details of the case, she listened in silence, her eyes fixed on the grainy photographs of Lily and Charlie. "You understand the risk," Corvin said, his voice gravelly with a stress that coffee couldn't cure. "This man has taken at least 2 women. We don't know what he does with them. He's clever, he's patient, and we have no idea how he operates or where he takes them. You will be alone and exposed." Eleanor Shaw didn't hesitate. She looked from Corvin's weary face to O'Donnell's determined one. "I understand, sir, and I can do it. I know that song.
I know how to sing it. Let me help you get this bastard." They built her a legend, a new identity from the ground up. Eva Lavelle, a singer from Philadelphia, new to the city, hungry for a break, vulnerable. They gave her a past, a wardrobe of borrowed glamour, an attitude of wide-eyed ambition. Salvatore Moretti, under significant pressure from the police and terrified of the scandal that would surely destroy his club, was strong-armed into giving her a one-week engagement. The legendary band leader, Miles Johnson, was brought into their confidence. The old musician was deeply reluctant. "That song, it ain't just notes on a page, detective. It's a weight. It's a truth. It's blood and history. To use it as a trap, it feels like we're spitting on a grave. It's bad juju." "We're trying to prevent more graves, Miles," O'Donnell replied, her voice soft but firm. "We need your help." He agreed, his face heavy with misgiving. He would work with Eleanor, arranging Strange Fruit in a unique, untouched key, E minor, to present a fresh, pristine interpretation for their discerning predator. The stage was being set, not for a performance, but for a hunt. The club was transformed into a web of surveillance. Microphones were hidden in tabletop vases and within the fake foliage of the stage. The entire building was wired for sound. Plainclothes officers filled the audience, their postures a little too stiff, their eyes constantly scanning, never resting. Corvin and O'Donnell would be at the bar, with their backs to the wall, their focus locked on the shadowy back booth. Every exit, including those in the kitchens and back offices, was covered. The trap was set, a spider's web of technology and tension. The night of the performance, the air in the Scarlet Club was thick with its usual cocktail of anticipation and vice, now laced with a new electric current of fear. Eleanor Shaw, as Eva Lavelle, took the stage. She felt a cold, sharp terror she had never known in a patrol car, a fear that threatened to freeze her vocal cords and still her heart. But as Miles Johnson counted in the band and the first mournful chords from the piano filled the room, her training took over. She closed her eyes. She wasn't Eleanor Shaw anymore. She was Eva, a girl with a dream and a heart full of borrowed sorrow. Her voice was different from Lily's smoky despair and Charlie's fiery rage. It was purer, more crystalline, a sound of devastating, elegant sorrow. She didn't just sing the words, she made the audience feel the chill of the southern breeze, see the bulging eyes, smell the magnolia, sweet and fresh. The room was utterly, profoundly silent, caught in the spell she was weaving. From the bar, Corvin and O'Donnell watched the back booth, and then they saw him, just as described. A man in an impeccably tailored gray suit. He wasn't watching the singer with lust or excitement. He was listening. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly, and his hands steepled under his chin as if in prayer. He was the picture of absolute, rapt absorption. He was there. The man in the booth was real, and he was taking the bait. Eleanor finished. The silence held for a long, breathless moment, then broke into a wave of genuine, moved applause. She took a bow, her eyes briefly meeting Corvin's across the smoky room. Phase 1 was a success. Her performance had been flawless. As planned, she went to the bar for a post-performance drink, playing the part of the vulnerable, hopeful newcomer basking in the afterglow. They waited for the man to approach her, to offer congratulations, to make his move, to give them a reason to arrest him. He did not. He simply stood, placed a crisp bill on his table, and walked out of the club, melting seamlessly into the flow of the Swing Street crowd. The plainclothes officers tailing him reported he walked calmly to a nearby parking garage, entered a sleek black Packard, and drove away, vanishing into the river of night traffic. He had taken the bait, but he hadn't bitten. He had listened, appreciated, and departed. It was a failure that felt in some ways more terrifying than a direct confrontation. It spoke of a predator with inhuman discipline, a man who was not driven by impulse, but by a meticulous long-term plan. Eva Laval was now on his list, a new, desirable vintage in his collection, and they had no idea when or how he would decide to make his acquisition. The waiting game had begun, and it was a game of nerves they were not sure they could win. The trap is sprung, and the killer takes the bait, listening with rapt attention to the new, intoxicating performance. But in a move that chills the investigators, he simply leaves, displaying a patience that is more frightening than any direct attack. The undercover officer is now a marked woman, her voice cataloged in the mind of a sophisticated monster. The police must protect her around the clock, knowing that a predator is watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The psychological warfare has begun, and the pressure is immense. To see how the killer turns the tables and makes his move, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The disciplined retreat of the man in the booth was a psychological blow that reverberated through the task force. It confirmed their darkest assessment. They were not hunting an impulsive, lust-driven killer, but a planner, a connoisseur who savored the anticipation as much as the acquisition. The metaphor of the vintage wine was more apt than they had imagined. He was letting this new bottle breathe, waiting for the perfect moment to uncork it. Detective Corvin immediately doubled the protection detail on Officer Shaw. She was moved from her apartment to a secure, anonymous safe house, her life put on indefinite hold. The constant, watchful presence of other officers was a cage, and the oppressive waiting was a unique form of torture, fraying nerves and stretching resources thin. The investigation now pivoted to the one solid, tangible lead they had: the black Packard. It was a common car for a man of means, but it was a thread, and they pulled on it with all their might. They ran down registrations, put out alerts to every traffic cop and parking garage attendant in the 5 boroughs. It was a monumental, grinding task, a search for a single dark fish in an ocean of asphalt and chrome. While the search for the car continued, the task force's forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Aris Thorne, was called in to provide a deeper analysis of the killer's mind. She was a woman of sharp intellect and an unnerving ability to see the patterns in madness. "She's not just a collector," she told Corvin and O'Donnell in a cramped, stuffy briefing room, the case photos spread before them like a tarot deck of doom. "He's preserving their performance. Not the memory of it, but the thing itself. The authentic, captured moment." The implication hung in the air, an unspoken, stomach-chilling dread. What did preservation mean in this context? Were the women kept alive somewhere? Trapped in a gilded cage, forced to sing for him over and over? Or was his method of preservation more final? The thought that they might be dealing with a killer who treated human lives as fleeting performances to be recorded and then discarded was almost too monstrous to comprehend. The break came not from advanced technology, but from an old-fashioned beat cop's memory and a paper ticket. An officer in Queens, going over the bulletins, remembered writing a citation a month earlier: a black Packard, illegally parked outside a large repurposed warehouse in Long Island City, an area of decaying industry and silent factories. It had struck him as odd for such an expensive, well-kept car to be in that neighborhood so late at night. He'd taken down the plate number. When the number was run, it came back to a shell corporation, but the make, model, and color were a perfect match.
This was it. Corvin and O'Donnell immediately assembled a tactical team. A full-scale dynamic raid was deemed too risky without knowing the interior layout. They could be walking into a fortified position or triggering the destruction of evidence. They settled on high-risk stationary surveillance. For 48 agonizing hours, they watched the warehouse. It was listed as a storage facility for a defunct recording company, Acme Sound Studios. The black Packard arrived and departed once, always driven by the same well-dressed man. Their target was in the nest. He was real, and he had a base of operations. On the third night, they witnessed something that erased all doubt and replaced it with a cold, urgent terror. The man arrived, but he was not alone. A young woman was with him, her arm linked in his. She was walking willingly, but her movements were slow, dreamlike, uncoordinated, as if she were sleepwalking or deeply drugged. She wasn't Lily or Charlie. This was a new victim, taken before they even knew she was missing. The clock was ticking. They had to move. Using city archives, O'Donnell managed to obtain the original blueprints for the Acme Sound Studios building. The main floor was a vast, open space, but the heart of the building, the reason for its soundproofing, was a central, heavily fortified recording studio, a perfect, isolated vault for a collector of voices. The decision was made. They would raid at dawn, using the element of surprise. The assault was a controlled explosion of force. The tactical team breached the front entrance with a roaring battering ram, their shouts echoing in the cavernous, dusty main room. As they secured the perimeter, Corvin and O'Donnell, using the blueprints, found a secondary fire escape entrance that led directly to the studio's control room, bypassing the main floor. They found the door unlocked. Weapons drawn, they stepped inside. The room was not a dungeon. It was a state-of-the-art recording studio, preserved in immaculate, obsessive condition. It smelled of ozone, polished wood, and old electronics. A large, soundproof pane of glass looked into an isolation booth. And inside the booth, a woman sat on a stool, a large vintage microphone before her. It was the woman from the night before. She was alive, but her eyes were vacant, staring at nothing. A pair of professional headphones was clamped over her ears. In the control room, a disc-cutting lathe was spinning, silently etching a recording onto a blank lacquer disc. The process was automated. The man in the booth was gone. He had fled, leaving behind his latest acquisition in a drugged stupor, her performance being captured for his archive without his physical presence. But as Corvin's eyes adjusted to the dim, indicator-lit gloom, he saw the walls of the control room. They were lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, and on each shelf, neatly labeled like a library's collection, were dozens of lacquer discs. His eyes scanned the labels: Liliana Dubois, Charlotte Green, and others. So many others. He wasn't keeping the women. He was keeping their voices. The preservation was sonic, a library of stolen souls. But the horror was just beginning. If he wasn't keeping the women, then what had he done with them after he had obtained his perfect, pristine recording? The killer's lair is discovered, a pristine recording studio where he preserves the voices of his victims on lacquer discs. The latest victim is found alive but in a catatonic state, her performance already being captured. But the killer has escaped, and the fates of the previous singers remain a terrifying mystery. The shelves of recordings are a library of lost voices, a symphony of sorrow. What is the final, terrible purpose of this archive, and what price did the women pay for their perfect, preserved performance? The search for the killer and the truth behind his collection takes a much darker turn.
To uncover the ultimate horror hidden within the grooves of the discs, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The warehouse studio was immediately locked down as a crime scene, a hive of frantic activity for forensic technicians. The catatonic woman was carefully extracted from the sound booth and identified as Rose Bellamy, a 22-year-old chorus girl from a Broadway revue who had been reported missing just 48 hours earlier. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked to stabilize her. The toxicology reports would later confirm a massive, precisely measured dose of a sophisticated sedative and hypnotic cocktail. The man in the booth was not just a collector. He was a pharmacological artist, a chemist, using science to sculpt the exact emotional tone and pliability he desired in his living instruments. He was doping them for the perfect take. The lacquer discs were treated with the reverence of artifacts from a cursed tomb. Handled with white gloves, they were carefully catalogued and transported to a secure FBI sound lab in downtown Manhattan. With a sense of profound and mounting dread, Corvin and O'Donnell and Dr. Thorne gathered in the sterile, acoustically treated room to listen. The sound engineer, a man named Henderson with a funereal demeanor, carefully lowered the diamond needle onto the disc labeled Liliana Dubois. After a brief crackle of static, her voice filled the room. It was strange fruit, but it was unlike any performance they could have imagined from the descriptions of her club act. The tempo was agonizingly, unnaturally slow, each word stretched into a drawn-out moan of despair. There was no musical accompaniment, no piano, no bass, just the raw, naked vulnerability of her voice, isolated and exposed. It was a sound beyond sorrow. It was the audio footprint of a soul being systematically dismantled. It was not a performance. It was an autopsy of a psyche. O'Donnell had to look away, her knuckles white. Corvin stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. Charlotte Green's disc was next. Her famous brassy power was gone, sanded away into a hollow, broken whisper. The defiance that had defined her had been chemically and psychologically extinguished, leaving only ashes and regret. Anya Petrova's recording from a year earlier was a mere breath, the ghost of a song, as if she were already fading from existence as she sang. Each recording was a unique masterpiece of misery, engineered by the killer. He wasn't documenting their talent. He was documenting their destruction. He was recording the moment the music died inside them. But it was the fourth disc they played that revealed the full, monstrous scope of his artistic vision. The label was blank. Henderson placed it on the turntable. The needle dropped. This time, it wasn't strange fruit. It was another older spiritual. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. The voice was younger, fragile, trembling on the edge of tears. And in the background, almost subliminal but unmistakable once heard, was another sound, a slow, rhythmic, grating creak. O'Donnell, her face a mask of horror, gestured for Henderson to isolate and amplify the background noise. He worked the dials on the complex board. The creak became clearer, more defined, a sound that was both familiar and alien. It was a sound O'Donnell had heard before, on a childhood trip to a historical plantation in Georgia. The sound of a rope bearing a heavy swinging weight, straining against a thick tree limb. A cold, absolute terror seized the room. The killer wasn't just recording their voices, he was recording the sounds of their murders, creating a sickening audio tableau to accompany his favorite song. Alistair Finch, a reclusive musicologist and audiophile, was identified as the prime suspect, and his secluded estate was the likely stage for his atrocities. The police were now racing against time not to prevent an abduction, but to recover the bodies of the lost singers and finally silence the composer of this symphony of death. What will they find in the quiet grove by the Hudson River? The final, horrifying crescendo is moments away. To witness the confrontation at the killer's estate, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The police convoy moved like a dark serpent through the idyllic Hudson Valley, the vibrant autumn foliage a garish, mocking contrast to the grim purpose of the men and women inside the cars. They were no longer hunters in pursuit of prey. They were a funeral procession, arriving at a cemetery that had yet to be consecrated. The GPS led them to a long, gated private driveway, which was quickly forced open. The house that came into view was a severe, modern structure of glass and steel, a cold statement of wealth and isolation perched dramatically on a bluff overlooking the wide, gray expanse of the river. It was imposing, but it was the land behind it that held their collective, horrified gaze. A vast private grove of massive, gnarled oak trees, their branches like twisted skeletal arms against the low, cloudy sky. The very air around the grove seemed still and heavy, charged with a silent, terrible history. The house was secured first by the tactical team. It was minimalist to the point of sterility, a museum to one man's obsession. Every surface was clean, every object placed with geometric precision. The only room with any sense of personality was a soundproofed study, a temple to the science and art of audio. The walls were lined with schematics for custom-built microphones, leather-bound treatises on vibrational resonance, and a vast library of ethnographic field recordings from remote corners of the world. It was the lair of a fanatic, a scholar of sound. But it was clean. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, no overt evidence of the women. It was a place of theory, not practice. It was the grove that held the horror, the practice room for his ultimate performance. As the tactical team moved through the trees, their boots crunching on the fallen leaves, they saw them. Not bodies, but the stark, brutal evidence of his macabre stagecraft. From the sturdiest limbs of half a dozen particularly large oaks, thick manila ropes still hung, their ends frayed and darkened. Directly beneath each rope, the earth was disturbed, the soil a different, darker color, looser, as if it had been recently turned and then hastily covered over. There were no visible mounds, no markers, but the ground itself was a series of scars, a silent testament to what had been buried there. In the very center of the grove, positioned for optimal acoustic capture, stood a small, open-sided pavilion. It was a professional, weather-proofed shelter housing a portable yet incredibly sophisticated recording setup. A silent, powerful generator, a disc-cutting lathe identical to the one in the Long Island City warehouse, and an array of the most sensitive, expensive microphones money could buy, all carefully aimed at the specific trees with the hanging ropes. This was his outdoor studio, his concert hall. This was where he recorded the final terrible tracks, capturing the sounds of the world as his strange fruit was made and then fell. The microphones had been positioned to pick up every detail: the rustle of the leaves, the sigh of the wind, the creak of the rope, the final, choked breath. The county medical expert and a team of forensic archaeologists were summoned. The scene was treated with the somber reverence of an archaeological dig. With painstaking, respectful care, they began to excavate the disturbed earth beneath the ropes. The process was slow, silent, and grim. One by one, they found them. Liliana Dubois, still in the evening gown she had worn for her last performance. Charlotte Green, her brassy blonde hair now dulled by dirt. Anya Petrova, and two others, women whose names were not yet in their files. Their disappearances from the fringes of the city's entertainment world never linked to the jazz scene. They had been buried where they were killed, their final, drugged performance their own execution. Alistair Finch had not just killed these women, he had used them as instruments in his own deranged composition, the final necessary element to achieve the ultimate authenticity. He had turned a song of social protest into a personal homicidal ritual, a perverse quest for the most authentic sound imaginable, the sound of death itself. But where was Finch? The property had been surrounded. His car was gone from the garage. He had vanished into the crisp autumn air. An all-points bulletin was issued for him and the Black Packard, but the man, with his wealth, his intelligence, and his foreknowledge, had evaporated into the crisp autumn air. The case was, in a practical, procedural sense, solved. The killer was identified, the victims were found, the method was understood. But for Corvin and O'Donnell, standing in that quiet, terrible grove, it was a hollow, Pyrrhic victory. The composer of this nightmare was still at large, his symphony complete, its final silent note hanging in the air, unresolved. He had achieved his masterpiece and escaped to appreciate it. The hunt for Alistair Finch was now a cold case, a lingering, dissonant echo of a terrible crime. But was the music truly over? The silence felt less like an ending and more like the pause between movements. The killer's outdoor studio is discovered, a grove of oak trees transformed into a stage for murder. The bodies of the missing singers are recovered, confirming the worst fears of the investigators. Alistair Finch is identified as the monster behind the music, but he has vanished, his artistic vision fulfilled, and his horrific collection complete. The case is closed, but the melody of Strange Fruit now carries a new, unspeakable weight for those who worked it. The hunt for Finch becomes a cold case, a lingering echo of a terrible crime. But is the music truly over? To learn the final, surprising fate of Alistair Finch and the legacy of his crimes, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the next chapter.
The public unraveling of the Scarlet Club abductions and the horrors at the Hudson Valley estate sent a seismic shockwave through the city and the nation. The name Alistair Finch became a new synonym for evil, representing the sophisticated intellectual monster, the artist of death who saw human life as mere pigment for his canvas. The story dominated the front pages for weeks, a sordid tale of jazz, obsession, and murder, but captivated and horrified in equal measure. The Scarlet Club, its reputation irreparably poisoned by the association, closed its blood-red doors forever, its vibrant music silenced by the grim echo of what had happened in its shadows. For Detective Frank Corvin, the case was a festering wound that no commendation could heal. He had seen the worst of humanity in his 2 decades on the force, but the cold, aesthetic calculation of Finch's crimes left a unique and profound scar. The violence was not hot and passionate, but cold and deliberate, a means to an artistic end. He took a mandatory leave of absence, but found no peace in his quiet apartment. He was drawn back to the evidence room, to the locked cabinet that contained the lacquered discs. He would listen to them, one by one, in the dead of night,
not for clues, but as a form of penance. He felt it owed it to Lily, to Charlie, to Anya, to all of them, to bear witness to their stolen final moments, to be the audience for their unwanted, posthumous performance. The sounds haunted his dreams, the slow, drawn-out agony of their voices a soundtrack to his own insomnia. Officer Eleanor Shaw, her undercover work complete and officially hailed as a success, returned to the records division, but the experience had fundamentally marked her. The memory of singing for the man in the booth, of feeling his intense, silent gaze absorbing her performance like a sponge, was a ghost that followed her through the sterile corridors of the precinct. She had been a breath, a single misstep away from becoming another disc on his shelf, her voice forever frozen in a moment of chemically induced terror. The stage fright she had once conquered now returned with a vengeance, a deep-seated anxiety that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with the memory of being watched by a predator. The official sprawling manhunt for Alistair Finch stretched from months into a year. The FBI theorized he had used his considerable wealth and meticulous planning to flee to South America or Europe, disappearing into the post-war chaos and anonymity. He was a ghost, a phantom that had composed his masterpiece and then vanished into the silence that followed it. The closure, when it came, was as bizarre, twisted, and intellectually arrogant as the man himself. A year to the day after the raid on his estate, a plain, unmarked cardboard package postmarked from within New York City arrived at NYPD headquarters. It was addressed specifically to Detective Francis Corvin. Inside, nestled in custom-cut black foam, was a single, pristine lacquer disc. There was no note, no return address, no fingerprints. Only the disc, an object of malevolent intent. With a sense of profound and weary dread, Corvin took it to the FBI sound lab. The engineer, Henderson, placed it on the turntable with the same funereal care as before. The needle dropped into the groove. There was no music, no singing, no sound of a rope or a struggle. Just the sound of a single, steady, mechanical tick, tick, tick. It was the sound of a metronome set at a slow, funereal tempo. It played for exactly 3 minutes, the standard length of a recording of Strange Fruit, and then the sound of the needle lifting from the groove and absolute, utter silence. It was a message, a final composition from Alistair Finch. Dr. Thorne was called in to analyze the recording. She listened to the 3 minutes of metronomic ticking in the silent lab, her face a mask of concentration. "The metronome," she said finally, her voice soft but clear in the dead air. "It is the keeper of time, the unseen engine behind all music. It provides the structure, the rigid framework upon which emotion is built. But here there is no music, no emotion, only the strict, unyielding, impersonal passage of time itself. He is telling you that time is the ultimate, purest composition, and that his work, the capturing of a moment of ultimate, authentic suffering, is now complete. The performance is over. The conductor has left the stage. This blank, rhythmic ticking is his finale. He is signing off." A week later, a body was found in a shabby, rented room in a nondescript boarding house in Newark, New Jersey. The landlord, concerned about a smell, had used a master key. The man had died of a deliberate, massive overdose of barbiturates, washed down with a glass of water. There was no identification on the body, but the landlord's description, a well-dressed, quiet man with sharp features and sad eyes, matched Alistair Finch. Dental records confirmed it. On the bare bedside table, next to the empty bottle and the half-full glass, was a single sheet of high-quality vellum paper. On it, in that same precise, elegant copperplate script they had seen on the disc labels,
was a short final note. The song has ended. The fruit has fallen. The recording is complete. There is no more authentic sound than the final silence. He had chosen his own ending on his own terms in a location devoid of the grandeur his crimes deserved. He had composed his own death, the final minimalist note in his symphony of silence. He had evaded earthly justice, a trial, a cell, but he had not escaped the confines of his own twisted artistic vision. His life's work was done, so he had stopped the metronome. For Corvin, it was the most unsatisfying, philosophically maddening conclusion imaginable. There was no trial, no confession in a court of law, no moment of public reckoning, just a sordid suicide in a dingy room and the memory of a metronome's tick on a disc. The killer controlled the narrative, the pacing, and the finale of his own story from the first abduction to his last calculated breath. He had granted himself the ultimate authorial control. The case was officially filed away, a dark, complex, and dissonant chord in the history of the city's crimes. The families of the victims had their bodies to bury, but they were denied the closure of a conviction. The police had their culprit, but they were robbed of the satisfaction of a capture. Corvin capped the metronome disc. He would sometimes take it out of his disc drawer and look at it, the smooth black surface reflecting the fluorescent light of his office. It was a monument to a mind that found a terrible, logical beauty in horror, and a rigid, aesthetic order in the ultimate chaos of murder. Alistair Finch was gone, but his echo remained, a silent, ticking reminder in the mind of the detective that some mysteries are not solved, but simply stop. The song is ended, but the silence it left behind was deafening. The case of the Scarlet Club reaches its haunting conclusion not with a dramatic arrest, but with a killer's quiet suicide and a final cryptic recording of a metronome. Alistair Finch evades justice by orchestrating his own end, leaving behind a legacy of artistic terror and unanswered questions. For Detective Corvin, the victory is hollow, the melody of the case forever unfinished. The echoes of the lost singers and the killer's twisted philosophy linger, a somber refrain in the heart of the city that never sleeps. This concludes the chronicle of the echoes of the Scarlet Club. For more deep dives into the most complex and chilling cases in history, where music, madness, and murder collide, your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the shadows where art reveals the darkest corners of the human soul.
In the months that followed the discovery of Alistair Finch's body, the city of New York attempted to move on. The sensational headlines faded, replaced by new scandals and the ever louder drumbeat of impending war. But for those touched by the case, the echoes of the Scarlet Club were inescapable. The story had become an urban legend, a ghost story told in the dimly lit bars that now dotted 52nd Street. A cautionary tale about the price of ambition and the darkness that could lurk behind a seemingly sophisticated facade. For Detective Frank Corvin, the closure was a phantom. He returned to active duty, but he was a changed man. The world, which had once seemed a place of solvable, if ugly, puzzles, now felt layered with a profound and unsettling ambiguity. He found himself looking at people not as they were, but as a collection of their past traumas, wondering what silent, frozen moments defined them. The metronome's tick was a constant, subconscious rhythm in the back of his mind. He had confronted a killer who saw human life as art, and while he had stopped him, he couldn't erase the terrifying logic that had driven him. The victory felt less like a triumph of good over evil and more like the interruption of a bizarre and malevolent artistic process. His partner, Rita O'Donnell, channeled her frustration into advocacy. She worked with city officials to create better protections for performers, particularly women working in the city's nightclubs. She gave lectures at the police academy on the psychology of obsessive criminals, using the Finch case as her primary example. For her, the case was a masterclass in the dangers of intellectual arrogance divorced from empathy. She had looked into the abyss of Finch's mind and had come away with a reinforced determination to protect the vulnerable from such calculated predation. The music scene itself was scarred. Strange Fruit became a taboo number for many singers, its power now doubly cursed by its association with Finch's atrocities. Some, however, reclaimed it, singing it with a new, defiant fury, a refusal to let a monster steal a song of protest. The ghost of the Scarlet Club loomed large, a reminder that the most beautiful music could be born from and attract the deepest pain. Officer Eleanor Shaw eventually transferred out of the records division, but not back to patrol. She joined a specialized unit dealing with crimes against children, finding a new sense of purpose in protecting the truly innocent. She never sang in public again. The part of her that was Eva Lavelle had been buried in that safe house, a necessary sacrifice. But sometimes, in the quiet of her own apartment, she would hum very softly, as if testing to see if the music still belonged to her and not to the memory of the man in the booth. The legacy of Alistair Finch was a complex one. In the annals of true crime, he was a unique specimen, the audiophile killer, the composer of murder. His name was studied by forensic psychiatrists and criminology students, a case study in the intersection of art, obsession, and homicide. His meticulously recorded discs, once evidence, now resided in a locked vault, a forbidden archive too disturbing for public consumption. They were the ghost notes in a song that the city was desperately trying to forget. But the most profound echo was the silence left by the missing women, the silence of the closed club, the silence at the end of Finch's final recording. It was a silence that was heavier, more profound, and more meaningful than any sound. It was the sound of a story that had no moral, a mystery that offered no catharsis, a melody that ended not with a resolution, but with a slow, fading tick, and then nothing. For Detective Corvin and for the city itself, the case of the Scarlet Club would never truly be over. It was a wound that had healed on the surface but ached with every change in the atmospheric pressure of memory. The music had stopped, but the echo would linger forever. The immediate case is closed, but its repercussions ripple through the lives of all involved. The city bears the scar of the Scarlet Club, a reminder of the darkness that can fester in its most glamorous corners. The investigators are forever changed, haunted by a killer whose motives transcended simple violence and ventured into the realm of twisted art. The story is over, but its echo remains, a permanent, dissonant chord in the symphony of New York. This concludes the chronicle of the echoes of the Scarlet Club. For more deep dives into the most complex and chilling cases in history, where music, madness, and murder collide, your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the shadows where art reveals the darkest corners of the human soul.
A decade passed. The world was transformed by war and its aftermath. The swing era that had defined the Scarlet Club gave way to bebop, then to rock and roll. West 52nd Street changed, the jazz clubs slowly replaced by more commercial ventures. The memory of the Scarlet Club murders began to fade from public consciousness, relegated to the status of a grim, half-remembered legend from a bygone era. Detective Frank Corvin retired from the NYPD. He bought a small, quiet house in New Jersey, far from the city's relentless energy. He took up woodworking, finding a simple, honest satisfaction in creating tangible objects with clear purposes. But he could not escape the past. The lacquer discs, or rather the memory of them, followed him. He never played the metronome disc again, but he didn't need to. Its rhythm was etched into his psyche. He would be planing a piece of wood, the steady back and forth motion reminiscent of that ticking, and he would be transported back to the sound lab, to the grove of oaks, to the silent, staring face of Rose Bellamy in the recording booth. The case was a splinter in his mind that he could never quite dig out. Rita O'Donnell rose through the ranks, becoming one of the youngest captains in the department's history. She was a reformer, a sharp, effective administrator who never lost sight of the human cost of crime. The Finch case had been her crucible, and it had forged in her a steel resolve. She occasionally mentored young detectives, and when she did, she used the Scarlet Club case as a lesson in the importance of understanding motive, not just method. Don't just ask what the killer did, she would tell them. Ask what he was trying to say. Every crime is a story. You need to learn to read it. The file on Alistair Finch remained technically open, a formality, but it was never far from O'Donnell's thoughts. She would sometimes request it from archives, not to work it, but to remember, to remind herself of the cost of failure and the hollow nature of their success. Then, in the winter of 1952, a package arrived at the precinct, addressed to Captain Rita O'Donnell. It was a flat, rectangular box, similar to the one Corvin had received years earlier. Her blood ran cold. Inside was not a lacquer disc, but a book, a leather-bound, handwritten journal. The script was unmistakable. It was Alistair Finch's diary. The journal detailed his descent into madness with a chilling, clinical precision. It began with his early fascination with authentic sound, his disdain for the sanitized recordings of the modern era. He wrote of his first time hearing strange fruit and experiencing it as an epiphany. Here, he wrote, was a song that did not shy away from the most authentic sound of all, the sound of human suffering given form. But it was merely a representation, a painting of a scream. I knew then that my life's work would be to capture the scream itself. The journal chronicled his stalking of the clubs, his selection process. He didn't see the women as people, but as vessels for a specific tonal quality. He wrote of Lily Dubois' smoky timbre of innate sorrow, Charlotte Green's brazen power begging to be broken, and Eleanor Shaw's, Eva Lavelle's, crystalline purity, so fragile it would shatter with the most delicate pressure. He detailed his pharmacological experiments, his design of the mobile recording unit, the acquisition of the property upstate. It was a blueprint for his atrocities written with the pride of a master craftsman. The final entry was dated the day of his suicide. The composition is complete. The final movement, my own, awaits. There is a harmony in this conclusion, a symmetry. I began with silence, the silence before the song. I end with silence, the silence after the final note. It is perfect. They will not understand, but they will remember. The echo is the point. The journal was a bombshell. It provided the confession and the closure the legal system had been denied. But for Rita O'Donnell, it was just another layer of the same maddening puzzle. He was still controlling the narrative, speaking to them from beyond the grave. He had planned this too, the posthumous delivery of his manifesto, ensuring his philosophy would outlive him. He wasn't just a killer, he was a propagandist for his own insanity. She called Corvin, now gray and retired, and read him excerpts over the phone.
There was a long silence on the line after she finished. "He's still playing," Corvin said, his voice old and tired. "Even now. He left that journal like a last will and testament. He wanted the final word, and he got it. They had the journal, they had the full story, but the victory, once again, felt like it belonged to Finch. He had orchestrated not only his crimes, but also their aftermath, his legacy. The echo, as he had intended, was indeed the point. A decade later, the killer's journal surfaces, providing a full confession, but also a final, posthumous act of manipulation. Alistair Finch continues to haunt the investigators from beyond the grave, controlling the narrative of his own crimes and ensuring his twisted philosophy is remembered. The case is more closed than ever, yet it feels more unresolved. The killer has the final word, and his echo continues to reverberate through time. To discover the final, enduring legacy of the Scarlet Club and the last word from those who survived it, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell for the concluding chapter.
Another decade slipped into history. The 20th century marched on, its music and its crimes evolving, but the story of the Scarlet Club and Alistair Finch remained a fixed dark star in the firmament of New York City lore. It was a tale told to wide-eyed rookie cops and written about in academic papers on criminal psychology. It was a ghost that would not rest. Frank Corvin lived out his days in the quiet of New Jersey. The woodworking soothed him, but the splinter of the Finch case never left him. He died peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1971, an old man whose most famous case was one he could never truly feel he had won. The metronome disc was found in a box of his effects, bequeathed to the police archives with no instructions. It was a relic, a curiosity, a key to a lock that no longer existed. Rita O'Donnell eventually became the first female deputy commissioner of the NYPD. Her career was decorated and distinguished, a testament to her brilliance and resilience. She never spoke publicly about the Scarlet Club case, but those close to her knew it was the foundational trauma of her professional life. It was the case that taught her that evil could wear a suit and tie, that it could be intelligent, charming, and motivated by a framework so alien to normal human experience that it was almost impossible to combat. Upon her retirement, she donated an anonymous sum to a fund for struggling musicians in the city, a quiet, private act of atonement for a wound that had never fully healed. The city itself moved on, as cities do. The building that had housed the Scarlet Club was demolished, replaced by a bland office building. The grove of oaks on the Hudson River was quietly purchased by a conservation trust and allowed to return to a natural state, a living memorial whose true history was known only to a few. The names of the victims, Liliana, Charlotte, and Anya, were eventually forgotten by the public, absorbed into the city's vast, anonymous history of loss. But the echo, as Alistair Finch had predicted, remained. It remained in the continued power of Strange Fruit, a song that now carried the weight of two different kinds of horror. It remained in the procedures changed within the NYPD, the greater protections for performers that O'Donnell had fought for. It remained in the cautionary tale told to young women coming to the city with dreams of fame,
A reminder to be wary of the too quiet man in the shadows, the one with the sad eyes. The legacy of the case was not of pure darkness. From the tragedy came a heightened awareness, a tightening of security, a recognition of a specific kind of predatory intelligence. The light that Detectives Corvin and O'Donnell had shone into that darkness had, in its own way, made the city a fraction safer, a little more aware. They had stopped a monster, even if they hadn't been able to destroy his ideology. The final cadence of the Scarlet Club was not a single note, but a complex chord of light and shadow. It was the memory of beautiful music perverted by unspeakable evil. It was the story of dedicated investigators forever marked by a battle with the phantom. It was the tale of a city that absorbed the trauma and moved forward, scarred but resilient. And it was the enduring, chilling truth that some art and some evil is so powerful that its echo never truly fades. It simply becomes a part of the background noise of the world, a silent, ticking metronome counting out the passage of time, reminding us that the past is never really past. It is only waiting, in the silence, to be heard again. This concludes the epic story of the echoes of the Scarlet Club. From the first disappearance to the final, lingering echo across decades, we have followed a tale of music, madness, and murder that redefined the meaning of obsession. The killer is gone, the victims are at peace, and the investigators have lived out their lives, but the story endures as a testament to the darkness that can hide behind a facade of art and the enduring light of those who fight it. For more deep dives into the most complex and chilling cases in history, where the lines between genius and monstrosity blur, your search for understanding continues with us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. We are always exploring the shadows, not to glorify the darkness, but to understand the light that fights it.